Someone had a sign that said, it's a genocide of black people. Right? Genocide of black people. Okay? So we're going to look at the data here. Go to the next one. People were killed by the police in 2016. How many people were killed by the police in 2016? What do you think?
I don't want to guess because I got it so wrong last time.
No, that's okay. No, guess. That's what this is about.
I'm going to say 1,000.
This is all people.
It's all people?
All people.
Wow. I think 1,000 too.
What do you all think? All right, here we go. 2016, 963.
Got it.
Okay?
Right.
You both nailed it.
Yeah.
You're good. Okay. And who are these people? What's their background? Right? Who are the people that got killed? Of 963, how many do you think were black?
I would say about 600 will be black.
600.
And then like the rest will be like maybe Hispanic.
600 were black. What would you say?
Probably like 500.
How many were black? Turn to the person next to you. Come up with a number. Dude, how many? All right, you ready? Next one. Okay, so here we go.
Oh, I'm surprised.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're off, right? If you're, what do you think about that number?
This is actually kind of surprising. I honestly thought it would be more black people because they show more black people getting like, I know, they like make it seem like black people are always getting like killed by the cops more than.
So the video I'm going to be referencing here is put out by a channel, SOC119. The professor here is Dr. Sam Richards of Penn State University. And this video is actually a few years old. This is about 6 or 7 years old. It was originally uploaded in 2017. The data isn't new. A lot of this stuff I already knew beforehand. But he puts it together in a compelling way, so I'm going to be referencing his video here. And at the onset here, I'm going to make two claims. One, the BLM narrative is largely false. The idea that we live in a systemically racist society in 2024 and that the cops are racist and they're just picking on black people and killing them indiscriminately. To the extent that they push that narrative, that is false. It's not supported by the data. And the second claim I'm going to make here is that BLM is a racket. Now, if you're going to make claims, it's a good idea to define what you're talking about. So I'm going to distinguish the phrase Black Lives Matter from the organization BLM. Now, I don't actually know anybody that thinks that Black lives don't matter. Some people might take issue with the phrase Black Lives Matter because they might say, well, all lives matter. Then we might say, why are we focusing on this particular group and actually within that particular group, we're only focusing on certain deaths. We're not, certainly in terms of death toll, there's much larger killers of black people than police violence. Why are we only hyper-focused on this particular problem at the expense of not focusing on other problems? But all that said, I don't know anybody that thinks black lives don't matter. But for the purposes of this video, I'm not really interested in that phrase. I'm more interested in the BLM.org, the actual organization, and the people that run that organization. It's my contention that this is a racket. It has a veneer of legitimate activism, but at its core, it's just a way for these people to get money and influence, and does very little, if anything, to actually help the black community in America, and it actually, in a lot of ways, harms them. Now, racket is defined as a fraudulent or often illegal activity that is carried out by means of extortion and intimidation. I don't know how much illegal activity, like directly, that BLM, the organization, engages in, but there's certainly fraudulent in the way that they represent their cause. And there is an element of intimidation at play, like certainly during the 2020 race riots, like a lot of businesses in big cities would put a BLM sign in their window as a way of like deterring the angry mob of rioters and looters from attacking their business, like by showing tacit support for it. And certainly like a lot of major corporations would donate to BLM. And you certainly had corporations and big organizations supporting BLM just to avoid a charge of racism, which often comes along with the territory. If you're at all critical of BLM, the organization, it's likely to get you criticized as a racist. So that's what I mean when I say it's a racket. It's based on a largely fraudulent narrative, and there is a degree of intimidation and extortion that goes on with this organization. So do we live in a systemically racist society, and are the police going out of their way to target black people? Well, I'm going to examine those claims by looking at the data, and I'm going to examine it with a skeptical mind, right? So we want to avoid two pitfalls here when we try to analyze the world around us. We don't want to be the gullible person. The gullible person wants to believe a story, so their standard for evidence is extremely low, and they tend to be overconfident in what they've decided to believe. That's the pitfall on the other side. And of course the opposite ditch we could fall into is denial. We could just refuse to believe. We could have an impossible standard of evidence, and we can be bold and overconfident in our denial of a problem. We want to stay skeptical. Whenever you're confronted with a claim in life that you haven't yet researched or thought about in great detail for yourself, you want to remain skeptical. You want to only begin to believe with evidence. And the evidence should support your claim. And if you're presented with new evidence, you should be open to changing your views, because that's what a smart, skeptical person would do. So the data that Dr. Richards presents is from 2016. But this number is roughly the same year over year. There's roughly 1,000 people that get killed by police every year. And the racial makeup of those killed by police is roughly, it's very similar. It's what you would expect. 60% of the population is white, so you would expect the majority of people that get killed by police to be white, just by statistical probability. And then blacks are, it's interesting that both students up front, as well as many of the students in the audience, thought that number would be higher, but blacks are actually not the majority of the people killed by police. Now, they are overrepresented. So if we look at this graph, and this data comes from, the population data probably comes from the Census Bureau, and then the Washington Post is also cited here. So if you look at percentage of the population, whites are roughly 60% of the population. They account for 45% of police fatalities. African Americans are a little over 13% of the population, but they account for 23, almost 24% of police fatalities. And this is if you point out to people that the majority of people killed by the police happen to be white, they'll pivot and say, well, that's true, but if we look at the per capita rate, or the rate at which people are killed, African Americans are overrepresented in police fatalities, meaning their population is 13.5%, but a lot more of them per capita are killed by the police. See, I gotcha. See, there's systemic racism in society. But you wouldn't draw that conclusion if you're presented with other data. So if we look at this chart, this not only breaks down by race, but it also breaks down by male and female. So if we look at this chart, these yellow lines are males of these groups and their likelihood of being killed by police. And we can see that males are grossly overrepresented in police fatalities. So there's a few narratives we could craft around that. Do we live in an oppressive matriarchal society where the cops are sexist and they're just out to kill as many men as possible, and that's why men are overrepresented in police fatalities? Well, you could make that claim, but is that really the best interpretation of the evidence? Maybe men are killed by police a lot more often because men are much more likely to violently resist arrest, and in fact men are much more likely to be involved in violent crime, so you would expect them to have more interactions with the police, simply because men commit a fuck ton more crime than women do, at least violent crime. You also note that at the bottom of this chart, the least amount of police fatalities are Asians, and they're put together with Pacific Islanders. So are the cops racist in favor of Asians, or do Asians just commit a lot less crimes than any of these other groups, and they resist arrest a lot less, and that's why they're not as likely to be killed by police? I think the latter interpretation of the data makes a lot more sense. It has nothing to do with bigotry. It has to do with the crime rate and the rate at which these different demographics, individuals within those demographics resist arrest, and that explains why some groups are more likely to be killed by police than others.
What would you say?
I find that kind of surprising too, but like I agree. Like I see more media like showing black people getting killed by police than white people, so it's probably just like in my mind, since I see it more, then it happens more.
Okay, so go to the next one. So here's U.S. population by ancestry, okay? So here we are, 63 right now, in mid-2016, 63% white, 17% Hispanic Latino. You see the numbers, right? So let's break this down and what we're talking about. Next slide. So here's the likelihood of being killed by the police. This is not, if you're doing illegal activity, this is just breaking it down. So you have 1 in 250,000 for black people. White people, clearly you're less likely to be killed if you're white.
So one interesting thing I noted about how they presented this data is, for some reason, Asians and NAs, I believe that stands for Native Americans, are lumped together. If you just put Asians by themselves, this would be a lot. Asians would be much less likely to be killed by the police than even whites, and if you were to look at them on their own. I'm not sure why they lumped them together, but if whites are killed by police at a higher rate than Asians, does that prove that we live in an Asian supremacist society? Because people are going to say, look, blacks are much more likely to be killed by police than whites, so that proves that we're a systemically racist white supremacist society. But again, you're just reading a narrative into the data without really understanding why are blacks more likely to be killed by the police than other groups.
I think that's pretty high, just because it's like a person, no matter, like, every life matters. So, like, I think 1 out of 250,000 is, like, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay, but listen, can I throw something at you now?
Yeah.
Okay. We haven't talked about what people were doing who were killed by the police, right? So if I'm a criminal and I'm trying to shoot her father, and then her father's partner, somebody shoots me, then that's not a high number. That 1 in 250,000, I was trying to kill somebody and I got shot in the process. So that's not inherently a problem. It's either I kill this innocent person, like if I'm going to try to kill you, let's say, right?
Yeah.
And somebody shoots me,
Yeah.
you're like, thank God you shot that knucklehead, right?
Yeah.
So right now, these numbers don't really mean a lot. Are we cool? They don't really mean a lot because we don't know what they are.
I think this is a really good point, and it's a point often overlooked by the people that engage in this sort of groupthink. They look at the data and they say, look, this group is overrepresented in this particular negative outcome, whether it's fatality by cop or whatever the case may be, therefore it must be racism. What's lost to them is that this data is merely an aggregate of a bunch of individual situations. So to really understand what's going on, you got to dig a little deeper and look into the the individual cases. What was going on when these people were killed by police? And back to my point about skepticism, if you're the gullible person and you've already decided you have a story that you want to believe that society is racist and the cops are racist and they're out to get black people, well, then you're likely to overlook this point. Was the person armed when they were killed? Were they resisting arrest? Were they engaged in a gun battle with the police? Were they threatening somebody else with a weapon when they were shot? Why do people resist arrest, evade cops, and then get into firefights with cops anyway? Well, a lot of times they're people with a criminal record. Maybe they have felony convictions in the past, and they figure, well, if I get arrested again, I'm going to go back to prison for a long time. So in their minds, they have a bigger incentive to resist arrest and to even get into violent encounters with the police, because if they just surrender to police, they're probably going to go back to prison for a long time.
So we can say, well, yeah, look, it's 1 in 250. Well, clearly, black people are more likely to get killed. Well, maybe black people are doing more things to provoke the police. So, we don't know that. We really don't know yet. So we got to go further. You see, you got to keep going further. Are you there? Are you following me?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. All right, man. Are we cool? Got it? This is a thinking class right now. I'm walking you through some thinking. Okay, go to the next one. So 233 black people were killed by the police in 2016 out of a population of 39 million. Okay? How would you answer that young man's question? Am I next? How would you answer his question?
I would honestly say yes, because I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like it's harder being a black male.
No, but what do you mean? He's saying, am I next?
Yeah.
Am I next? You're saying, yes, you are next?
I mean, he better watch out the things he does.
Okay,
because,
got you. Watch out.
Yeah, just watch out, because he's kind of like a target, his appearance. He looks like a typical black male, so.
Okay, so if he's holding a sign and then I'm holding the sign, or I don't know, somebody else who looks more like him, a white guy and that dude over there who looks like a hippie, right, in the front row. If that dude's holding a sign, you're going to say, yeah, this guy, you should watch your back more than that guy.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay, no, that's cool.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I think that opinion does make sense. I agree with the watch your back thing, but also watch the situations you get yourself into as well. You know what if you're in a more dangerous situation, then more can go wrong then.
Okay, we're going to go one more. Ready? So how many of the 963 people were unarmed? This is what we're talking about here, right? Remember the story? It's if I got a gun to the two of you, right? I have a gun to your heads. That's very different than if I'm just walking up next to you or behind you and somebody sees me and shoots me because they think I'm going to do harm to you, right? It's very different. If I have a weapon, if I don't have, if I say, hey, I'm going to kill these two people and I'm standing here and I have no weapon on me, I have nothing, and the police shoot me anyway, it's very different than if I'm standing here with a knife saying I'm going to kill these two people. Okay, are we good with that? So how many of the 963 people were unarmed? How many do you think were unarmed? Of the 963. What do you think? Unarmed. 963. We're talking white people. How many do you all think? Turn to the person next to you. What do you think? How many of the 963 were unarmed? Okay, here we go. Go to the next slide. So here are the numbers. This was the most comprehensive analysis of the data. done by a research team at the Washington Post. It's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty accurate. So 69 unknown, but unknown enough that they didn't throw them in the unarmed category. So they were, you assume that the likelihood of being unarmed is equal percentage-wise, ratio-wise to the other. And in a vehicle, can we be clear about a vehicle? That's a vehicle trying to run over police. Toy guns. A lot of those people, of course, were committing suicide in all likelihood because that seems to be a form. What do you think about that number? Hang on, can I ask you first? What do you think about that number? You said 600.
I said 550.
500, and you said 400. We're unarmed. You said 500. We're unarmed. What do you think about that number?
I'm actually kind of like shocked. I honestly thought like, I'm not saying like the media, like, I don't know, they just made it seem like, the guy was innocent, he was just trying to go about his way. But I don't know, like, I don't know the numbers they took or the guys they took it from or whatever. But I just think it's just crazy how 517 had a gun. I would think it would be less than that.
Yeah, okay.
To be honest,
yeah, so you certainly think it would be more.
Way
Especially
less than
given
that.
what you just said about looking at your Twitter feed and
Yeah.
Facebook and social media and so on, right?
I mean, well, like, we know, like, the media just exaggerates everything, so I guess not to pay attention to it.
Wait, did she just say the media misrepresents things and exaggerates things? Say it ain't so.
What do you think about the number?
I'm actually pretty surprised by it too, but when I think about it more, I guess like since the media does portray more of those stories where the person is unarmed, so again, like it makes me think that there are more cases of unarmed things, but clearly there's not.
So 22 out of 233 black people who police killed in 2016 were unarmed. 22 out of 233. Okay? So now the question is, so that means you have a 0.6 chance in a million. 0.6 chance, about half of 1% in a million of being unarmed, black skin, and killed by the police.
So on this one point, I don't think the professor is as clear as he could be. Merely being armed doesn't necessarily put you at higher risk of being killed by the police. I mean, there's tens of millions of gun owners in America. There's probably tens of millions of people that lawfully carry every single day. Almost every state in the union now has concealed carry provisions of some form or another where people can lawfully carry guns around. And those people aren't in any serious risk of being shot by the police just because they're armed. Now, it's a different story if you're engaged in violent criminal behavior and armed and in an altercation with the police. It's a different story if you're in unlawful possession of a firearm. If you're a felon, convicted felon, walking around with a gun that you're not supposed to have, out committing crimes, and you happen to get into an altercation with the police, well, that's a much different story than just your average law-abiding citizen that happens to be carrying a gun. So I think he belabors this point about just don't be armed, but I think he could have been a little more concise with that.
So now, when you answer that guy's question, am I next? What would be your answer to that question?
22 out of 233 black people, I think that's a lot.
Go with the bottom one.
But the bottom?
0.6 out of a million. If he stays unarmed, you say, bro, listen, in spite of how you're dressed, in spite of who you are, if you remain unarmed, right, that's the likelihood of you being killed by the police.
I think it's a lot because even 0.1 would be a lot to me.
So it goes back to what
Yeah.
Brianna said. Brianna, right? Brenna?
Yeah.
What Brenna said. It's like it's still to that one family, it matters. Okay, and so what I'm going to say to the two of you is, look, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? It's like it just depends. We can argue that that's a high number, we can argue that's a low number. We can argue it's exaggerated. We can argue like, no, man, it's not exaggerated. It's still really high. Like, what is it? You can make the argument in lots of different directions. But what I want to say is, look, if we're going to make the arguments and if we're going to get involved in protests, like, can you go to the next slide, bro? No, hang on, go to one more. That, if you're going to protest like that, but this whole thing is based on police violence against black and brown people. So if you're going to protest, really step out in this way, you got to know what you're protesting. It's really important to understand what it is. You know what I mean? Is it like 600 unarmed people, or is it, hang on, 42 or 48, or like what are we looking at here? Like, is it a genocide? So when I see someone holding a sign up that says, "Stop the genocide of black people," at a protest, and I'm saying, go back, can you go back 2 slides? I wouldn't call that a genocide. There's a lot happening here, but that's not what I would call it. And so for me, as someone who's talking about race relations, who sees these things from lots of perspectives, it's really important that we know what we're talking about so that we can be confident and have realistic and good conversations. Because I agree with you. I mean, yeah, it's still high. And yet, it's not what most people think. If I took a microphone, if I went to that protest in St. Louis last week and I walked around with the microphone and I started asking people, hey man, how many people was it last year? How many people? And each one of those, and even the people who are armed, it doesn't matter, it's a life, right? But if I start asking that question, people are going to give me these really, really high answers. I'm sure 5,000, 8,000, I have no idea. It's like, no, man, that's not bringing us where we need to go.
So I'm going to link the full unedited video below that I used here. Sam Richards puts out some interesting stuff, so if you found this interesting, check out that full video and check out some of his other stuff. I do think, even when we look at the unarmed, that doesn't necessarily mean unjustified. I mean, there's plenty of instances you can be unarmed, but if you're reaching for an officer's weapon, and you get shot in the process, that doesn't mean unarmed doesn't necessarily mean not dangerous. Or if you're reaching, you know, if you're being confronted by police and you have guns drawn on you and you reach into your waistband, well, maybe you don't have a weapon, but you still engaged in a dangerous act there because the cop didn't know whether you had a weapon or not. Or if you reach under your seat in a altercation with police, there's a lot of things you can do that signal danger to the officer that could get you killed, whether you are armed or not. So even the unarmed cases, you can't just brush off as unjustified shootings. That said, in a nation of 350 million people, with hundreds of thousands of police officers and millions of interactions between police and the public every year, there are certainly cases of unjustified police shootings. So I don't want to make the case here that every single police action is justified, because there definitely is cases where it's not. My point is, you just have to be skeptical and like dig into the data and find out what really happened in those particular cases. And it's my contention that activist groups like BLM and probably other groups don't do that. I mean, they don't, you could go to all the BLM rallies in the world and talk to people, and you probably would never be presented with a lot of the data that you just saw here if you made it this far in this video. But what do you think? Do you think BLM pushes a narrative that's largely false as far as racism and as far as the cops targeting black people for no other reason than the fact that they happen to be black? And I don't want to make this video an hour long, so I'm not going to delve into this point, but why are there disparities in criminality? Why do Asians, for example, have a very, very low crime rate and very few interactions with police, and they're underrepresented in things like incarceration or fatality by police officer, as were other groups? Let's look taking race out of the equation entirely. Why are men more prone to be involved in altercations with police and more likely to get killed by police than women? What's going on in the black community that they're overrepresented in all these negative outcomes, whether it's death by police or incarceration? And if you can't just chalk it all up to systemic racism, well then what's really going on? I mean, without going into a lot of detail, my opinion is that it has to do with family structure and culture. Children from broken homes and that have unstable upbringings are far more likely to get into criminal activity in their young adulthood, and they're far more likely to have all kinds of problems. And it just so happens Asian Americans have one of the most, as a demographic, not everything, when you look at demographics, you got to remember not everything is true on an individual level, but if you look at them as a demographic, they have one of the strongest family structures, the most intact families, and a lot of cultural resources that evidently help keep them out of trouble and help them excel in society. Not everybody has that. Some groups tend to have very unstable upbringings and a lot of broken homes and things like that, and that, in my opinion, leads to a lot of negative outcomes. You're far more likely to get into trouble as a young adult if you come from a broken home and don't have a lot of stability in your life. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comment section below. You've been watching the Fletch Report. If you're hearing this, it means you've made it to the end of the video. But before you click onto the next thing and continue down whatever rabbit hole you're on YouTube or Rumble, I've got a small favor to ask. If you found value in my content and you want to help the channel out, the best thing you can do is share it with somebody else that you think will find value in it. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more. Links to the channel on YouTube and Rumble will be provided below. Additionally, I'm making a Facebook page for the channel as well as a X/formerly Twitter. Feel free to follow me on those platforms as well. If you're feeling exceptionally generous, provided in the description below will be a link to Buy Me a Coffee, which is the online equivalent of a tip jar. Thanks for watching, and thanks for supporting the channel.